The receptionist mocked him like a broke backpacker, not knowing he owned the entire hotel as a millionaire boss. Hi, my beautiful story family. Welcome back to Mr. Peter Stories. Today, I speak to you with a heavy heart. For the past 3 days, YouTube has reduced our reach by 80%. After all the time, love, and effort I've poured into this channel, it hurts deeply. Honestly, I wasn't even going to write today's story, but then I remembered, this isn't just a channel, this is my family, and when someone is in need, they don't go to strangers, they go to their own. So today, I ask not as a creator, but as your own. Please like this video, leave a comment, and share it with just 5 people who need a good story. I'm not begging, I'm reaching out to my heart, and that heart is you. Here's my prayer for you. May you never feel alone in your battles. May love find you when you least expect it. And may you always be lifted by those who truly care. And if you're still standing with me, please comment below. We are with Mr. Peter. That one line means the world to me. The marble floors of the Golden Heart Hotel gleamed like liquid moonlight under the cascading brilliance of crystal chandeliers, each surface polished to mirror perfection that reflected the opulent beauty of New York's most prestigious luxury establishment. The lobby was a masterpiece of understated elegance. Soaring ceilings adorned with hand-painted frescoes, massive arrangements of white orchids and roses that perfumed the air with their delicate fragrance, and furnishings that whispered of old money and timeless sophistication. Nancy Esser stood behind the ornate reception desk, carved from Italian marble, her heart hammering as she worked her very first night shift at the most prestigious hotel in the city. The weight of this opportunity pressed against her chest like a physical force. This job represented everything she had worked toward, dreamed of, sacrificed for. One mistake, one moment of unprofessionalism, and she could lose the chance to build the career that would lift her family out of their financial struggles forever. At 24, Nancy possessed an understated beauty, smooth caramel skin that seemed to glow with an inner radiance under the soft lighting, intelligent brown, eyes that sparkled with determination and warmth, and thick curly hair pulled into a professional bun with a few strands softly framing her face. She wore the hotel's crisp white uniform blouse with pride, having pressed it until it was perfect, and her simple black skirt and modest heels completed an ensemble that spoke of professionalism and quiet dignity. She had worked 3 jobs just to afford the interview outfit hanging in her tiny closet at home, had studied every protocol manual until she could recite procedures in her sleep, and had practiced her professional smile until her cheeks ached from the effort. The Golden Heart Hotel was legendary. 5 stars, celebrity guests, and a reputation for impeccable service that wealthy elites traveled across continents to experience. Nancy was determined to prove herself worthy of being part of this world. Even if she could never afford to be a guest in it, the evening had been relatively quiet, with only a few guests checking in and out, each interaction a small test that Nancy passed with careful precision. The head concierge had already complimented her efficiency, and she felt a warm glow of pride beginning to build in her chest like the first rays of sunrise after a long, dark night. It was nearly midnight when the revolving door swept open with a soft whisper, admitting a rush of cool autumn air that carried the scent of rain and the distant sounds of the city that never sleeps. A man stepped into the opulent lobby, and Nancy glanced up from organizing the leather-bound registration cards, her breath catching involuntarily in her throat despite her determination to remain professional. He was devastatingly handsome in a way that belonged on magazine covers and movie screens. Tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of commanding presence that made people instinctively turn their heads. His dark hair looked like he had run his fingers through it in frustration, and there was a weariness in his posture that spoke of long days and difficult decisions. His strong jawline was shadowed with the beginning of stubble, and his dark eyes held depths that seemed to reflect both intelligence and something that looked suspiciously like loneliness. His expensive charcoal suit was perfectly tailored to his athletic frame, the kind of bespoke craftsmanship that cost more than Nancy. Made in several months, his Italian leather shoes gleamed under the chandelier light, and the platinum Rolex on his wrist caught the ambient lighting with subtle flashes that spoke of wealth beyond most people's imagination. Everything about him screamed money and power, and the kind of sophisticated elegance that belonged in this world of crystal and marble and old money privilege. But Nancy had grown up in a neighborhood where she had learned to be wary of wealthy men who thought their money could buy anything, including her respect and her body. She had seen too many of her friends hurt by rich boys who treated working-class girls like temporary entertainment, who made promises they never intended to keep and left broken hearts in their wake like discarded champagne bottles after a party. This man, despite his obvious wealth and undeniable attractiveness, would get no special treatment from her beyond professional courtesy. Her dignity was not for sale at any price. Josh Lepper paused just inside the lobby, exhaustion weighing on him like a physical burden after 18 hours of grueling meetings in Chicago. His flight had been delayed by a thunderstorm that had grounded planes for hours. His usual driver was home sick with the flu, and he wanted nothing more than to reach his penthouse suite and forget about the business deal that had gone spectacularly wrong despite months of careful preparation. The Golden Heart was his sanctuary, his pride and joy, the crown jewel of his hotel empire that he had built from nothing into something extraordinary. But tonight felt different. Tonight, there was someone new behind his reception desk, and she was absolutely mesmerizing. Josh had owned the Golden Heart for 6 years and knew every staff member by name, from the executive chef to the night janitors who kept his hotel spotless. This stunning woman was new and clearly exceptional in a way that had nothing to do with her obvious beauty. Even from across the expanse of marble and crystal, he could see the determination in her posture, the intelligence in her movements, the way she carried herself with quiet dignity that spoke of inner strength and unshakable principles. There was something about her that made his pulse quicken in a way that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with the primal recognition of a soul calling to its match. She was lovely, certainly, with her smooth caramel skin, graceful neck, and the way the soft lighting caught the gold undertones in her dark hair. But it was more than physical attraction that drew him across the lobby like a moth to flame. There was an aura of authenticity about her, a realness that was as rare in his world as diamonds in coal. As he approached the marble counter, Josh felt an unfamiliar flutter in his chest that he hadn't experienced since he was a teenager with his first crush. He dated supermodels and socialites, had been pursued by women whose beauty graced magazine covers and whose family names opened doors across the globe. But none of them had ever made his heart race just by existing in the same space. This woman, this goddess behind his own reception desk, was already stealing his breath, and she hadn't even spoken yet. As he approached the desk, Josh felt an unfamiliar flutter in his chest. He'd dated supermodels and socialites, but none of them had ever made his pulse quicken just by existing. This woman, this goddess behind his own reception desk, was already stealing his breath, and she hadn't even spoken yet. "Good evening," Josh said warmly as he reached the marble counter, his voice carrying the cultured accent of expensive private schools and Ivy League universities, tinged now with the kind of bone-deep weariness that came from too many 18-hour days and too little genuine human connection. "Excuse me," Nancy interrupted sharply, not even bothering to look up from her computer screen where she was updating guest records with meticulous attention to detail. "I'm busy with important hotel business. You'll need to wait your turn like everyone else who thinks they're special." Josh blinked in surprise, his dark eyes automatically scanning the completely empty lobby that stretched around them like a marble cathedral. The only sounds were the soft, classical music, floating from hidden speakers, and the distant hum of the elevator machinery. "I'm sorry, but I don't see anyone else." "Are you arguing with me?" Nancy's eyes snapped up to meet his, and Josh felt his breath catch as he was struck by the full force of her gaze. Her dark eyes flashed with annoyance and something deeper. A fierce pride that had clearly been tested by too many entitled customers who thought money gave them the right to treat service workers as less than human. "Look, sir, I don't care how expensive that suit is or how much you think your time is worth compared to mine. This is a professional establishment with standards, and you'll follow our procedures. Wait your turn and show some respect." The dismissive tone, the cold professionalism, the complete lack of recognition for who he was. Josh felt as if he'd been slapped by a silk glove. In his own hotel by his own employee, he was being treated like an unwelcome inconvenience, an entitled guest who needed to be put in his place. Any other staff member would have recognized him instantly, would have been falling over themselves to ensure his comfort and meet his every need. But this beautiful stranger looked at him like he was just another wealthy man trying to use his privilege to cut corners and demand special treatment. And yet, instead of anger, Josh felt something else entirely washing over him like warm honey. Fascination, admiration, the intoxicating realization that here was someone who couldn't be bought, impressed, or intimidated by his wealth and power. When was the last time anyone had challenged him? When was the last time someone had looked at his expensive clothes and been completely unimpressed? When was the last time he had met someone who stood up for what they believed was right, even when faced with someone they assumed had more money and influence than they could ever hope to possess? Nancy's laugh was sharp and humorless, cutting through the elegant atmosphere of the lobby like a blade through silk. "Is that supposed to be some kind of insult? Yes, I'm new, but I know how to do my job properly, which is more than I can say. For guests who think they can waltz in here and demand special treatment just because they're wearing designer labels and flashing expensive watches." She gestured dismissively at his perfectly pressed suit and platinum Rolex, and Josh found himself oddly charmed by her complete lack of intimidation. Her fire, her refusal to be cowed by wealth and privilege, was like nothing he had ever encountered in his rarefied world of boardrooms and charity galas. "You know what?" Nancy continued, her voice dripping with professional disdain that barely concealed a deeper frustration with entitled customers who had clearly tested her patience before. "Let me save us both some time and trouble. If you're looking for a room, we're completely booked, has been for months. If you're looking for our bar, it closed an hour ago. If you're looking for someone to be impressed by your obvious wealth and bow down to your superiority, you're in the wrong place entirely." She leaned forward slightly, her dark eyes blazing with an inner fire that made Josh's pulse race in the most unexpected way. "The nearest budget motel is 6 blocks south, and I'm sure they'd be happy to accommodate someone with your refined tastes and charming personality." Josh stared at her in stunned silence that stretched between them like a taut violin string. She thought he was a random guest. She had no idea who he was, no idea that she was essentially telling the owner of the hotel to find somewhere else to stay. The irony was so complete, so absurd, that he almost laughed out loud despite the sting of her rejection. But beneath the shock and amusement, something deeper and more profound was stirring in his chest, like the first warm breeze of spring after a long, cold winter. This woman, this fierce, proud, utterly fearless woman, had just defended her workplace against what she perceived as an entitled customer who thought money could buy respect. She was protecting the Golden Heart's standards, standing up for what she believed was right, even when faced with someone she clearly assumed had more money and power than she did. In a world where everyone knew his name, his wealth, his influence, here was someone who saw only a man. A man she didn't particularly like, apparently, but still just a man. Not a bank account or a business opportunity or a stepping stone to a better life. Just a human being who, in her opinion, was behaving badly and needed to be put in his place. The realization hit him like lightning striking twice in the same spot. This woman was extraordinary. Absolutely, utterly, breathtakingly extraordinary. "I see," Josh said quietly, his voice betraying none of the emotional tumult raging in his chest like a storm-tossed sea. "Well, thank you for your thorough explanation of the hotel's policies and your frank assessment of my character." Nancy's eyes narrowed suspiciously at his polite tone, as if she suspected sarcasm but couldn't quite identify where it might be hiding in his carefully neutral words. There was wariness in her expression now, mixed with the fierce pride that seemed to be as much a part of her as breathing. "You're welcome," she said curtly, her chin lifting in a gesture that spoke of battles fought and won against people who had tried to make her feel small. "Is there anything else I can help you with? Because I do have actual work to do, and unlike some people, I take my responsibilities seriously." Josh looked at her for a long moment, really looked at her with the intensity of a man trying to memorize something precious that might disappear at any second. The proud tilt of her chin that dared the world to challenge her, the unwavering directness of her gaze that refused to be intimidated by wealth or power, the way she held herself, like a queen even while wearing a simple hotel uniform. She was magnificent in a way that had nothing to do with designer clothes or expensive jewelry, and everything to do with the unshakable strength of her character. In that moment, standing in his own lobby, being thoroughly dismissed by his own employee, Josh felt something shift inside his chest, like tectonic plates finding a new alignment. This woman, this beautiful, fierce, completely authentic woman, had just shown him something he hadn't even realized he'd been searching for. His entire adult life, she had shown him what it felt like to be seen as just a person, to be judged on his behavior rather than his bank account, to encounter someone whose respect couldn't be bought at any price. She was everything he hadn't known he needed, everything he hadn't dared to hope still existed in his world of calculated relationships and strategic alliances. She was real in a way that made everything else in his life seem like elaborate theater, genuine in a way that highlighted how shallow and meaningless most of his interactions had become. "No," he said softly, a slow smile spreading across his face despite the sting of her rejection, despite the complete upheaval of his understanding of himself and what he wanted from life. "I think you've helped me more than you know, more than you could possibly imagine." And with that, Josh Lepper turned and walked toward the elevator with measured steps that belied the racing of his heart, leaving behind a very confused Nancy. Essa, who had absolutely no idea that she had just changed the life of the most powerful man she would ever meet, or that he was already falling hopelessly, irrevocably in love with the woman who had seen past his wealth to find him wanting, and had had the courage to tell him so. Chapter 2. The Shocking Discovery. Nancy's hands trembled slightly as she pushed through the revolving doors of the Golden Heart Hotel, her stomach churning with a mixture of dread and determination. She had barely slept after her shift ended at dawn, tossing and turning in her cramped studio apartment while replaying every moment of her disastrous encounter with that arrogant guest. The man's amused smile haunted her dreams, that infuriating, knowing look that suggested he found her outburst entertaining rather than professional. Maybe she had been too harsh. Maybe her quick temper and fierce pride had cost her the best job opportunity she'd ever had. Nancy had grown up watching her mother work 3 jobs just to keep food on the table, had seen too many landlords and bill collectors treat their family like garbage simply because they didn't have money. She had sworn to herself that she would never bow and scrape for anyone, that she would demand respect regardless of the designer labels they wore or the cars they drove. But now, walking through the marble lobby in the bright morning sunlight, she wondered if her principles had just destroyed her future. The Golden Heart Hotel bustled with activity even at 8 in the morning. Guests in elegant attire glided across the polished floors, their quiet conversations mixing with the gentle sounds of classical music floating from hidden speakers. Nancy straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin, determined to prove herself worthy of this place regardless of last night's incident. "Nancy, there you are, honey." Sage Dakota, her new friend from housekeeping, practically bounced over with excitement radiating from every pore. Sage was a petite woman with kind eyes and an infectious smile, and she had been the first person to welcome Nancy to the Golden Heart family. "Girl, you are not going to believe what's happening today?" "What do you mean?" Nancy asked, though she was already dreading the answer. Had word of her rudeness spread through the staff? Was she about to be called into the manager's office for a disciplinary meeting? "Mr. Lepper is here." Sage practically squealed, grabbing Nancy's arm with barely contained enthusiasm. "Our owner, the big boss himself, he's been away for weeks on some major business deal and everyone's been dying to see him. He's absolutely gorgeous, Nancy, like movie star gorgeous. And he's the sweetest man you'll ever meet. He remembers everyone's birthdays, gives Christmas bonuses that make people cry with gratitude, and he actually cares about every single person who works here." Nancy felt the blood drain from her face. Owner? The Golden Heart had an owner who was here, in the building right now? She had assumed the hotel was owned by some faceless corporation, not an actual person who walked the halls and knew his employees by name. He's here now?" Nancy managed to whisper. "Yes." The whole staff is buzzing about it. Carmen from accounting said he looks a little tired from his trip, but still absolutely devastating in that expensive suit of his. "You know how these billionaire types dress, always immaculate, always perfect." Sage paused, studying Nancy's pale face with concern. "Honey, are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." Before Nancy could respond, a ripple of excitement swept through the lobby. Staff members who had been going about their morning duties suddenly stood a little straighter, their faces lighting up with genuine affection and respect. Nancy turned toward the elevator bank, her heart hammering against her ribs with growing dread. And there he was. The man from last night stepped out of the private elevator, looking even more devastatingly handsome in the morning light. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his charcoal gray suit was clearly custom-made, and his presence commanded the entire room without him saying a single word. But it was his eyes that made Nancy's knees go weak, those same intelligent, amused eyes that had watched her tear him apart with such fascinating intensity. Josh Lepper, owner of the Golden Heart Hotel, the man she had treated like dirt and told to find a hostel. "Oh my God," Nancy breathed, her voice barely audible over the sound of her own thundering heartbeat. Josh's gaze swept the lobby until it bound her, and that same knowing smile played at the corners of his mouth. Instead of anger or irritation, his expression held something that looked almost like warmth, amusement. Nancy couldn't tell, and that uncertainty terrified her more than outright fury would have. "Nancy Esser," called Bryce Donovan, the hotel manager, his voice carrying across the marble expanse. "Mr. Lepper would like to speak with you in his office." Every eye in the lobby turned to Nancy, and she felt her cheeks burn with humiliation. This was it. She was going to be fired, probably banned from ever working in the hospitality industry again. Her one chance at a better life, destroyed by her own stubborn pride. "Go on, honey," Sage whispered encouragingly. Maybe he just wants to welcome you personally. He does that sometimes with new employees. Nancy forced her legs to move, each step across the lobby feeling like a march to her execution. Josh waited for her by the elevator, his expression unreadable, and she couldn't help but notice how the morning sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows made his dark hair gleam with auburn highlights. The elevator ride to the penthouse level passed in suffocating silence. Nancy stared at the floor numbers, watching them climb higher and higher, each ding of the bell marking another second closer to her professional doom. Josh stood beside her, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and masculine that made her traitorous pulse quicken despite her terror. His office was a testament to understated luxury. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the city skyline, while rich mahogany furniture and original artwork created an atmosphere of quiet power. Josh moved behind his massive desk and gestured for Nancy to take one of the leather chairs facing him. "Please sit," he said, his voice gentle and completely free of the anger she had expected. Nancy perched on the edge of the chair, her spine rigid with tension. "Mr. Lepper, I want to apologize for last night. I had no idea who you were and Stop," Josh said quietly, raising one hand. "You don't need to apologize." Nancy blinked in confusion. I don't. You were doing your job, protecting the hotel's standards, standing up for what you believed was right. I respect that." Josh leaned back in his chair, studying her with those penetrating eyes. "In fact, I was impressed by your dedication to professional protocols." "You were impressed that I told you to find a hostel?" Nancy asked incredulously. A genuine laugh escaped Josh's lips, and the sound was rich and warm. "Among other things, yes. Tell me, Nancy, how long have you been working in hospitality?" "This is my first hotel job," Nancy admitted, her honesty getting the better of her caution. "I've been working retail and restaurant positions to put myself through business school. I want to build a career in hotel management someday." "Ambitious, I like that." Josh stood and moved to the window, his hands clasped behind his back as he gazed out at the city. "I have a proposition for you, Nancy. Something that could change your life if you're willing to take a risk." Nancy's mouth went dry. "What kind of proposition?" Josh turned back to face her, his expression serious now. "I need someone to accompany me to several high-profile business events over the next week. Charity galas, investment dinners, social functions where appearances matter. The woman I was supposed to take, let's just say that arrangement fell through unexpectedly." "I don't understand. You want me to work the events, serve drinks, or—" "No," Josh interrupted softly. "I want you to attend them as my date. My companion for the evening." Nancy stared at him in shock. "You want me to pretend to be your girlfriend?" The business world can be ruthless, especially when competitors sense weakness. Having the right person by my side sends a message of stability, success, partnership. You're beautiful, intelligent, and you've already proven you won't be intimidated by wealth or power. Josh's eyes met hers directly. "In exchange, I'll pay you $50,000 for 1 week of your time." The number hit Nancy like a physical blow. $50,000. More money than her family had ever seen at once, enough to pay off her student loans, help her mother with the mortgage, maybe even start her own small business someday. "Why me?" she whispered. "You could have any woman in the city." "Because you're real," Josh said simply. "And because last night, you looked at me and saw just a man. Not my money, not my reputation, not what I could do for you. In my world, that's rarer than diamonds." Nancy's mind raced. It was crazy, impossible, completely outside anything she had ever imagined for herself. But $50,000, that was her future, her family's security, her dreams made real. 1 week? she asked quietly. 7 days, a few hours each. Evening, you'll need elegant clothes, which I'll provide. All you have to do is smile, be yourself, and let people assume we're together. Nancy took a shaky breath. And after the week is over? After the week is over, you go back to your life. With $50,000 and my eternal gratitude. It sounded too good to be true. It probably was too good to be true. But looking into Josh Lepper's eyes, Nancy saw something that made her want to take the leap. Okay, she whispered. I'll do it. Josh's smile was radiant. Then, Nancy Esser. Welcome to my world. Chapter 3. The Boutique Transformation. The sleek black Bentley glided through the streets of Beverly Hills like a shadow, its leather interior enveloping Nancy in luxury she had only ever seen in movies. Camden Rivers, Josh's driver and closest friend, navigated the traffic with the practiced ease of someone who had been chauffeuring the wealthy for years. Nancy sat in the back seat next to Josh, trying not to gawk at the opulent neighborhoods passing by her window. Nervous? Josh asked softly, his voice carrying genuine concern. Nancy turned to look at him, struck once again by how the afternoon sunlight streaming through the tinted windows highlighted the strong angles of his face. He had changed from his business suit into perfectly fitted dark jeans and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Yet somehow he looked more approachable, more real, terrified, she admitted honestly. I've never owned anything that cost more than $50, and you're taking me to buy evening gowns that probably cost more than my car. Josh's laugh was warm and reassuring. Your car is that ancient Honda Civic in the hotel parking garage, isn't it? The one with the duct tape holding the bumper on. Nancy flushed with embarrassment. You noticed that? I notice everything about you, Josh said quietly, then seemed to realize how intimate that sounded. He cleared his throat and looked out his window. I notice details. It's important in business. The butterflies in Nancy's stomach performed elaborate acrobatics. There had been something in his voice, something in the way his eyes lingered on her face that suggested his interest went beyond their business arrangement. But that was impossible, wasn't it? Men like Josh Lepper didn't fall for women like her. This was just a job, a temporary arrangement that would end in 7 days. We're here, Camden announced, pulling up in front of an exclusive boutique that looked more like a private mansion than a store. The sign above the door read, Maison Evangeline in elegant gold script, and Nancy could see through the floor-to-ceiling windows that the interior was all marble, crystal, and intimidating sophistication. This is where all the society women who shop, Josh explained as they walked toward the entrance. Octavia Sterling has been dressing the wealthy elite for 20 years. She's particular about her clientele, but she has exquisite taste. The moment they stepped through the door, Nancy felt the weight of judgmental stares. The boutique was intimidating, all marble, crystal, and obvious wealth. Every surface gleamed, and the saleswomen looked like fashion magazine models. Octavia Sterling emerged from the back of the store like a queen greeting her subjects. She was a tall, elegant woman in her 50s, with silver hair pulled back in a severe chignon, and sharp blue eyes that seemed to catalogue and dismiss everything they saw. Her smile was warm and welcoming when she spotted Josh, but it faltered, noticeably when her gaze fell on Nancy. Joshua, darling. Octavia glided forward with practiced grace, her arms outstretched in greeting. How wonderful to see you. I heard you were back in town. Her eyes flickered over Nancy with barely concealed disdain. And you've brought a friend. Octavia, I'd like you to meet Nancy Esser, Josh said smoothly, his hand coming to rest gently on Nancy's lower back in a gesture that was both protective and possessive. Nancy, this is Octavia Sterling, the most talented designer on the West Coast. Nancy extended her hand with a polite smile. It's lovely to meet you, Mrs. Sterling. Octavia's handshake was brief and cool, her eyes taking in Nancy's simple black dress and modest accessories with obvious disapproval. Charming, she said in a tone that suggested the exact opposite. And what brings you to Maison Evangeline? Today, Joshua. Please don't tell me you need another gift for that dreadful Evangeline Hartwell. I simply cannot dress that woman one more time without compromising my artistic integrity. Actually, I need a complete wardrobe for Nancy, Josh said, his voice carrying a subtle note of warning that made Octavia's eyebrows rise. Evening gowns, cocktail dresses, accessories. We have several important events this week, and I want her to have the finest of everything. Octavia's smile became even more strained as she looked Nancy up and down like she was evaluating livestock. I see. Well, I suppose we could find something suitable. Though I must warn you, Joshua, dressing someone of her background for high society events is quite challenging. The fit, the bearing, the natural grace required, these things simply cannot be bought. Nancy felt heat rise in her cheeks, but before she could respond, one of the younger saleswomen approached, with a smirk that didn't quite reach her eyes. Mrs. Sterling, the girl said in a voice dripping with false sweetness, should I pull some items from our budget-friendly collection? I'm sure we can find something appropriate for someone in her low position. The condescension in the woman's tone was unmistakable, and Nancy felt the familiar fire of anger begin to burn in her chest. She had dealt with this kind of treatment her entire life, people who looked at her clothes, her address, her background, and decided she was somehow less worthy of respect. Actually, Nancy said, her voice steady despite the fury building inside her, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Mr. Lepper and I will be attending charity galas and investment dinners. With some of the most influential people in the city, I'll need gowns that reflect that level of sophistication. Unless, of course, Maison Evangeline isn't capable of providing that caliber of fashion. Octavia's eyes narrowed dangerously. I assure you, my dear, that Maison Evangeline has dressed royalty, Hollywood stars, and women whose names grace the society pages around the world. I simply question whether someone of your humble origins would be comfortable in such elevated fashion. What she means, the saleswoman added with a cruel smile, is that these gowns require a certain breeding to wear properly. It's not just about the money, darling. It's about knowing how to carry yourself, how to move in society circles. These aren't costumes for playing dress-up. Nancy felt as though she had been slapped. The casual cruelty, the assumption that her worth as a person could be measured by her bank account or her zip code, hit her like a physical blow. She had walked into this boutique with excitement and hope, ready to be transformed into the kind of woman who could stand beside Josh Lepper with confidence. Instead, she was being reminded of every reason why she didn't belong in his world. Enough. Josh's voice cut through the boutique like a blade, quiet, but carrying such authority that every conversation in the store stopped instantly. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees as he stepped forward, his eyes blazing with a fury that made both Octavia and her saleswoman take an involuntary step backward. Let me make something very clear, Josh continued, his voice never rising above a conversational tone, but somehow more menacing than any shout. Nancy is not my employee, my charity case, or my temporary amusement. She's a remarkable woman who deserves your finest service and your utmost respect. If you cannot provide that, we'll take our business elsewhere. He moved closer to Octavia, and Nancy had never seen him look more powerful, more commanding than in that moment. I've spent over $200,000 in this boutique over the past 5 years, Octavia. Evangeline Hartwell, Senator Morrison's wife, the mayor's daughter. They all wear your designs because I recommended this place. That recommendation can very easily become a warning to stay away. Octavia's face had gone pale, and she looked as though she wanted to disappear into the marble floor. Joshua, I never meant any disrespect. Of course, we'll provide Miss Esser with our finest service. No, Josh said coolly. You've shown your true colors today, and frankly, I'm disgusted. Nancy deserves better than this. He turned to Nancy, his expression softening immediately. Come on, there are a dozen other boutiques in this city that would be honored to dress you properly. As they turned to leave, Octavia's voice rose in panic. Wait, please, Joshua, let me make this right. I'll personally see to Miss Esser's wardrobe myself. Our finest gowns, our most exclusive pieces. Please, don't leave like this. Josh paused, looking at Nancy with questioning eyes. It's your choice, he said softly. We can go somewhere else, or we can stay and let them show you the respect you should have received from the beginning. Nancy looked at Octavia's desperate face, then at the saleswoman, who was now staring at the floor in shame. She could leave, take the high road, let Josh's money and influence do the talking. Or she could stay and prove that a girl from the wrong side of town could wear these gowns with more grace and dignity than any society princess ever could. We'll stay, Nancy said quietly, but only if everyone here understands that courtesy and respect are the minimum standards for service, regardless of who's paying the bill. Josh's smile was radiant with pride. I couldn't have said it better myself. And as Octavia Sterling began pulling the most exquisite gowns from her collection, treating Nancy like the queen she was finally recognized to be, Nancy realized that Josh Lepper had just shown her something more valuable than all his money. He had shown her his character. Chapter 4. The Opera Awakening. The Metropolitan Opera House rose before them like a palace woven from starlight and dreams, its majestic facade bathed in thousands of golden lights that transformed the limestone columns into pillars of pure luminescence against the velvet evening sky. Nancy stood on the crimson carpet leading to the entrance, her breath visible in small puffs in the cool air, feeling as though she had stepped through a portal into the most exquisite fairy tale ever written. The emerald green gown that Octavia Sterling had grudgingly selected for her flowed around her like liquid silk touched by moonbeams, its elegant design making her feel beautiful and sophisticated in a way that transcended anything she had ever experienced before. The fabric whispered against her skin as she moved, and the way Josh's eyes never left her face made her feel like the most precious jewel in a treasury of wonders. Couples in their finest attire swept past them up the grand staircase. The women's gowns rustling like autumn leaves, their jewelry catching the light in brilliant flashes of fire and ice. The air was filled with the soft murmur of cultured voices speaking in half a dozen languages, the gentle clink of champagne glasses, and an undercurrent of anticipation that made Nancy's pulse quicken with excitement. "You look absolutely breathtaking," Josh murmured beside her, and the sincerity in his voice made her heart skip several beats. Nancy turned to look at him, and her breath caught in her throat. Josh wore a perfectly tailored black tuxedo that emphasized his broad shoulders and tall frame, while his dark hair was styled with casual elegance that made him look like he had stepped off the cover of a magazine. But it was the way he was looking at her, with wonder and something deeper, something that made her pulse race, that took her breath away. "I feel like I'm wearing a costume," Nancy confessed as they joined the stream of elegantly dressed patrons, flowing toward the entrance. "Like I'm pretending to be someone I'm not." "You're not pretending to be anyone," Josh said softly, offering her his arm with old-fashioned gallantry. "You're just letting the world see the woman I saw from the very first moment I met you." The lobby of the opera house was a vision that defied mortal imagination. Soaring ceilings adorned with crystal chandeliers that cast rainbow prisms across marble walls. Grand staircases that curved upward like frozen waterfalls of cream-colored stone, and frescoed ceilings that depicted scenes of musical triumph painted by masters whose names were whispered with reverence. Nancy had never seen anything so magnificent, so utterly breathtaking, and she found herself walking closer to Josh, drawn to his warmth and strength like a flower seeking sunlight. The scent of his cologne, something expensive and masculine, with notes of sandalwood and bergamot wrapped around her senses, making her hyper-aware of his presence beside her. When he offered his arm with old-world gallantry, the simple touch of her hand against his sleeve sent electricity racing up her arm and straight to her heart. "You look like you belong here," Josh murmured, his voice low and intimate as they joined the elegant crowd, making their way through the opulent space. "Like you were born to wear silk and diamonds and be surrounded by beauty." Nancy's cheeks warmed at the compliment, but she shook her head with characteristic honesty. "I feel like I'm wearing a costume, playing a part in someone else's life." Josh stopped walking and turned to face her fully, his dark eyes serious and intense. "You're not playing anything, Nancy. This is who you've always been. You're just finally in a place that's worthy of your natural grace. Have you ever been to the opera before?" Josh asked as they made their way through the crowd of New York's social elite. "Only in movies," Nancy admitted. "My mother used to watch old films on Sunday afternoons, the ones with beautiful women in gorgeous gowns singing their hearts out. I always wondered what it would feel like to be in the audience, to hear those voices live." Josh's smile was warm and genuine. "Then tonight will be magical. We're seeing La Traviata. It's the story of a courtesan named Violetta, who falls in love with a young man from a respectable family. It's heartbreaking and beautiful and absolutely perfect for your first opera experience." They found their seats in a private box that offered a perfect view of the stage, and Nancy couldn't help but gasp at the opulence surrounding them. The red velvet seats, the gilded balconies, the massive crystal chandelier hanging above the orchestra. It was like being inside a jewel box. "Josh," she whispered as the lights began to dim, "this must have cost a fortune. You didn't have to." "I wanted to," he interrupted gently, his hand covering hers on the armrest between their seats. "I wanted to see your face when you experienced something beautiful for the first time." As the lights dimmed and the curtain rose with ceremonial majesty, Nancy was instantly transported into a realm where passion lived and breathed and took physical form through the power of human voices. The soprano's first notes soared through the hallowed space like a living thing with wings of silver and gold, filling every corner with emotion so pure and powerful that Nancy felt tears prick at her eyes before the first act had barely begun. The stage came alive with swirling dancers in period costumes, their movements painting stories across the boards while the orchestra wove magic from the pit below. But it was Violetta's voice, achingly beautiful, heartbreakingly vulnerable, that reached into Nancy's chest and wrapped itself around her heart like silk ribbons. Josh found himself completely mesmerized, not by the world-renowned performance unfolding before them, but by the woman sitting beside him. Nancy leaned forward in her velvet seat during the dramatic moments, her lips parted in wonder, her dark eyes reflecting the stage lights like captured starlight. When Violetta sang of love and sacrifice, Nancy's hand moved unconsciously to her heart, and Josh felt his own heart constrict with an emotion so profound it took his breath away. The way Nancy responded to beauty, with her whole soul, without reservation or pretense, made Josh realize that he wasn't just attracted to her, wasn't just infatuated or charmed. He was falling in love with a depth and intensity that terrified and exhilarated him in equal measure. Every tear that sparkled on her cheek, every soft gasp of wonder that escaped her lips, every moment where she forgot herself completely in the music made him fall deeper into something that felt like drowning in starlight. He was falling in love, not the casual attraction he had felt for other women, not the calculated partnerships that had defined his previous relationships, but real, soul-deep, life-changing love. Nancy's beauty was obvious, but it was her response to the opera, her genuine, unguarded emotional reaction to the story unfolding before them, that made Josh realize he would give anything to spend the rest of his life watching her discover new wonders. During the first intermission, they stepped out onto a private balcony overlooking Lincoln Center, the city lights twinkling below them like a carpet of diamonds scattered across black velvet. The cool night air carried the distant sounds of Manhattan, car horns and sirens, and the eternal hum of 8 million lives being lived. But up here, in their intimate bubble, high above the world, it felt like they were the only two people in existence. Nancy moved to the marble railing, her profile illuminated by the soft golden light spilling from the opera house windows behind them. The gentle breeze stirred the loose tendrils of hair that had escaped her elegant updo, and Josh thought he had never seen anything more beautiful in his entire life than this woman silhouetted against the cosmos. "The music," Nancy said softly, her voice filled with wonder and something deeper, something that sounded like longing. "It's like watching someone's heart break in the most beautiful way possible. I can feel Violetta's pain, her joy, her desperation. It's all so real, so immediate." Josh moved to stand beside her at the railing, close enough to catch the subtle scent of her perfume mingling with the crisp autumn air. "What do you think of her story? Of her choice to love someone she knows she can't have?" Nancy was quiet. For a long moment, her dark eyes reflecting the city lights as she considered the question with the serious attention she gave to everything important. "She's tragic," she said finally, her voice carrying a weight that made Josh's chest tighten. "She loves Alfredo with everything she has, but she knows their love is doomed from the very beginning. Society will never accept their relationship. She's from one world, he's from another, and the difference is too great for them to bridge. No matter how much they love each other, no matter how perfect they are together, the world will always see her as unworthy of him." Josh felt something crack inside his chest at her words. Was that how Nancy saw them? Did she think the differences between their worlds were insurmountable? Did she believe that society would always view her as somehow less than him? But what if love could bridge that gap? Josh asked carefully, his voice rougher than he intended. What if two people cared about each other enough to fight for their happiness, regardless of what society expected or demanded? What if their love was strong enough to overcome any obstacle? Nancy turned to look at him, her dark eyes searching his face in the soft light, and Josh felt his heart hammer against his ribs with desperate hope. For a moment, one perfect, breathless moment, he thought he saw something in her expression that matched the love burning in his own chest. "Do you really believe that's possible?" Nancy asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "That love can truly conquer everything?" "I'm beginning to think it's the only thing that matters," Josh said quietly, his words carrying more weight and meaning than any business deal he had ever negotiated. Before Nancy could respond, the chimes sounded to call them back for the second act, and the moment slipped away like smoke. As the final act unfolded with devastating beauty, Nancy wept openly for Violetta's sacrifice, for the love that could have been, for the happiness that society's cruelty had destroyed. The soprano's final aria, sung as Violetta lay dying from consumption, was so heartbreaking that Nancy had to press her hand to her mouth to stifle the sobs that threatened to escape. Tears streamed down her cheeks unchecked, and she didn't care who saw them or what anyone thought of her emotional display. Josh watched her tears with a mixture of tenderness and growing determination that burned in his chest like a flame. This woman, this beautiful, passionate, deeply feeling woman who wept for fictional characters and opened her heart to every joy and sorrow the world offered, deserved every happiness that life could provide. She deserved to be loved completely, cherished absolutely, and protected from every cruelty and disappointment. She deserved him to be brave enough to tell her that she had become the center of his universe. As the curtain fell and the audience erupted in thunderous applause that seemed to shake the very foundations of the historic building, Josh turned to Nancy with his heart hammering against his ribs like a caged bird desperate for freedom. She was wiping her eyes with the silk handkerchief he had given her face glowing with the aftermath of the emotional journey they had just shared. And Josh knew he would never have a more perfect moment to bare his soul. "Nancy," he began, his voice surprisingly unsteady despite all his careful preparation. "I need to tell you something important." She looked up at him with those luminous dark eyes that had haunted his dreams, still bright with unshed tears, and Josh felt his carefully rehearsed words scatter like rose petals in a storm. How could he explain that in just 4 days, she had transformed not just his hotel arrangements, but his entire understanding of what it meant to be alive? How could he tell her that watching her experience beauty, seeing her respond to music and art and story with such genuine emotion, had made him realize that everything he thought he wanted from life had been hollow and meaningless? "The opera," he started again, then stopped, running his hand through his hair in frustration as the crowd around them began to move toward the exits. "What I mean is, watching you tonight, seeing how you responded to Violetta's story, to her love and her sacrifice." Nancy waited patiently, giving him her complete attention despite the bustling activity around them. And Josh felt the weight of her expectation like a physical force. "I think," Josh said carefully, choosing each word, like he was handling precious gems, "that some love stories don't have to end in tragedy. I think some people are brave enough to fight for their happy ending, regardless of what the world tells them is impossible. I think some loves are strong enough to overcome any obstacle, any difference, any challenge that society puts in their way." Nancy's smile was soft and touched with sadness, and Josh's heart sank as he realized his message hadn't landed the way he had hoped. "That's a beautiful thought, Josh. I hope someday you find someone who makes you want to fight for that kind of happy ending. Someone who makes you believe that love really can conquer everything." Josh stared at her in amazement and growing despair. She had completely missed what he was trying to tell her. She thought he was speaking hypothetically, philosophically, about love in general, rather than about the very specific, very real, very desperate feelings that were threatening to tear him apart from the inside out. "Nancy, he began again, but she was already gathering her purse and wrap, the moment lost in the bustle of the crowd preparing to leave. "Thank you for tonight," she said as they made their way toward the exit. "It was the most beautiful thing I've ever experienced. I'll never forget it." Josh nodded, swallowing his disappointment and his unspoken words. "You're welcome," he said quietly. "I'm glad I could share it with you." As Camden drove them back to the hotel through the glittering streets of Manhattan, Josh stared out the window and wondered how many more opportunities he would have to tell Nancy Esser that she was becoming the most important person in his world. Chapter 5: The Business Dinner Triumph. The private dining room at Le Bernardin was a study in understated elegance, with cream-colored walls adorned with original Impressionist paintings and a massive crystal chandelier casting warm light over the mahogany table set for 12. Nancy stood beside Josh in the doorway, her sapphire blue cocktail dress making her look like a goddess of the night, and tried to calm the butterflies performing aerial acrobatics in her stomach. "Remember," Josh murmured close to her ear, his breath warm against her skin, "you don't need to impress anyone. Just be yourself, and they'll be charmed within minutes." Nancy nodded, drawing strength from his confidence in her, though she couldn't quite shake the feeling that she was about to walk into a lion's den. This dinner was crucial for Josh's latest hotel acquisition deal, and the guests represented Some of the most influential investors and business leaders in the country. One wrong word, one social misstep, and she could destroy months of careful negotiations. Mr. Lepper, a distinguished man in his 60s, approached them with a warm smile, his silver hair perfectly styled and his custom suit speaking of old money and older power. Richard Morrison, Morrison Holdings, so pleased to finally meet you in person. The pleasure is mine, Josh replied smoothly, shaking the man's hand with practiced ease. Richard, I'd like you to meet Nancy Esser. Nancy, Richard Morrison owns half the commercial real estate in Manhattan. Nancy extended her hand with a genuine smile, remembering everything Josh had taught her about firm handshakes and direct eye contact. Mr. Morrison, it's wonderful to meet you. Josh speaks so highly of your business acumen. Richard's eyebrows rose slightly. Clearly, he hadn't expected such articulate professionalism from Josh's companion. The pleasure is mine, my dear. And please call me Richard. I must say, Josh, you've managed to surprise us all once again. As they moved into the room, Nancy met the other guests one by one. There was Margaret Chen, the steel-haired CEO of Chen International, who controlled shipping routes across the Pacific. Senator Patricia Wells, whose political influence could make or break development projects with a single phone call. David Rodriguez, the tech mogul, whose investment portfolio included 3 of the fastest-growing companies in Silicon Valley. And then there was Evangeline Hartwell. She swept into the dining room like a queen entering her court, her platinum blonde, hairstyled in an elaborate updo that showcased diamond earrings the size of grapes. Her black evening gown was clearly couture, probably costing more than most people's cars, and she wore it with the confidence of someone who had never doubted her place in the world. Joshua, darling. Evangeline glided toward them with practiced grace, her red lips curved in a smile that didn't quite reach her cold blue eyes. I was beginning to think you weren't coming tonight. Josh's expression tightened almost imperceptibly, and Nancy noticed the way his jaw clenched when Evangeline leaned in to kiss both his cheeks in the European fashion. Evangeline, I'd like you to meet Nancy Esser. Evangeline's gaze swept over Nancy with the calculating assessment of a predator sizing up potential prey. How lovely, she said in a tone that suggested the exact opposite. And where do you know Joshua from, dear? Nancy works at the Golden Heart, Josh said, before Nancy could answer, his hand finding the small of her back in a gesture that was both protective and possessive. Oh, how quaint. Evangeline's smile became even more razor-sharp. It's so admirable when successful men take an interest in charitable causes. Josh has always been generous with the less fortunate. Nancy felt heat rise in her cheeks. But before she could respond, Margaret Chen appeared at her elbow with a glass of champagne and a conspiratorial smile. Don't mind Evangeline, Margaret said quietly. She's been trying to sink her claws into every eligible billionaire in the city since her divorce settlement ran out. Now tell me about yourself, dear. What do you do at the Golden Heart? As they settled around the elegant table, Nancy found herself seated between David Rodriguez and Senator Wells, with Josh directly across from her, where he could catch her eye if she needed reassurance. The conversation flowed as smoothly as the wine, touching on everything from international trade agreements to the latest Broadway productions. Nancy discovered that her nerves began to fade as she realized these powerful people were, at their core, simply human beings with interests and passions beyond their wealth and influence. When David mentioned his daughter's struggle with dyslexia, Nancy shared her own experience tutoring children with learning disabilities during college. When Senator Wells expressed frustration with the homeless crisis in major cities, Nancy offered thoughtful insights from her years of volunteer work at local shelters. You know, Margaret Chen said during the fish course, her dark eyes sparkling with genuine interest, I've been in business for 30 years, and I can usually read people within minutes of meeting them. Nancy, you have something most people in our circles have forgotten: authenticity. It's refreshing. Josh watched with growing admiration as Nancy won over every person at the table with her genuine warmth, realizing she was extraordinary. "Tell us about your background, dear," Richard Morrison said, leaning forward with grandfatherly interest. "What brought you to the hospitality industry?" Nancy set down her fork and smiled, her composure complete despite the intensity of their attention. "I grew up in a family where hospitality meant something different than five-star service. My mother always said that making someone feel welcome in your home, whether it was a palace or a one-bedroom apartment, was one of the most important gifts you could give. When I started working at the Golden Heart, I realized that luxury isn't about thread count or champagne brands. It's about making every guest feel like they matter." The table fell silent for a moment, and Nancy wondered if she had said something wrong. Then David Rodriguez began to smile, followed by Margaret Chen, and soon the entire table was nodding in agreement. "Brilliant," Senator Wells murmured. "Absolutely brilliant. Josh, you found yourself a philosopher." "Indeed," Richard Morrison agreed. "In my experience, the best business leaders understand that success isn't about what you have. It's about how you make people feel about themselves." Evangeline's smile had become increasingly strained as the evening progressed, and it became clear that Nancy was winning over every person at the table with her authentic charm. Finally, she decided to strike. "How fascinating," Evangeline said with false sweetness, her voice cutting through the warm atmosphere like a blade. "It's so noble of you to bring such perspective to these discussions. Tell me, Nancy, what exactly did you do before you started working at the hotel? I'm sure everyone would love to hear about your previous experiences." The question was loaded with malicious intent, clearly designed to expose Nancy's working-class background and make her feel ashamed of her humble origins. Nancy felt the table's attention focus on her like a spotlight, and for a moment, the old, familiar shame tried to creep up her throat. Then she caught Josh's eye across the table. He was looking at her with such warm encouragement, such obvious pride and affection, that her confidence returned in a rush. "Of course," Nancy said smoothly, meeting Evangeline's gaze directly. "I worked 3 jobs while putting myself through business school: retail sales at a department store, waitressing at a family restaurant, and tutoring children from low-income families. It taught me that hard work has its own dignity, that every job is important if you do it with integrity, and that the most valuable education often comes from understanding how the other half lives." She paused, her smile becoming radiant. "I wouldn't trade those experiences for anything. They taught me to appreciate genuine quality, to value substance over appearance, and to recognize the difference between people who are worth my time and people who simply think they are." The last comment was delivered with such elegant diplomacy that it took Evangeline a moment to realize she had been thoroughly and publicly dismissed. When the meaning sank in, her face flushed red with humiliation. The rest of the table, however, erupted in warm laughter and applause. Margaret Chen actually reached over to squeeze Nancy's hand, while Richard Morrison raised his glass in an impromptu toast. "To Nancy Esser," he declared, "who has just reminded us all why character matters more than pedigree." As glasses clinked around the table and the conversation resumed with even more warmth than before, Josh caught Nancy's eye and mouthed 2 words that made her heart soar. "I'm proud." In that moment, surrounded by some of the most powerful people in the country who were treating her like an equal, Nancy realized something that both thrilled and terrified her. She was falling in love with Josh Lepper. Chapter 6. The Piano Bar Disaster. Josh's fingers trembled like autumn leaves in a gentle breeze as he adjusted his platinum cufflinks for the 4th time, staring at his reflection in the ornate mirror of his penthouse suite. The man looking back at him bore little resemblance to the confident billionaire who commanded boardrooms and closed million-dollar deals with casual ease. This man had vulnerability written in every line of his face, hope and terror warring in his dark eyes, and the kind of nervous energy that came from standing on the precipice of either the greatest triumph or the most devastating failure of his life. The Golden Hearts piano bar had been transformed into something from the most romantic dreams ever dreamed. Hundreds of pillar candles flickered throughout the intimate space, their warm golden light dancing across crystal glasses and polished mahogany surfaces. The scent of white roses, Nancy's favorites, which he had discovered by bribing the florist, who delivered to her modest apartment, perfumed the air with their sweet, delicate fragrance. The Steinway grand piano had been polished to mirror perfection, positioned perfectly to catch the candlelight and create an atmosphere of such romantic enchantment that even the most cynical heart would be moved to believe in fairy tales. Josh had spent hours that afternoon rehearsing the piece he planned to play for Nancy, Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, a hauntingly beautiful composition that had always moved him but would now carry the weight of his deepest, most vulnerable feelings. His fingers knew every note by memory, had played this piece countless times over the years, but tonight it would be different. Tonight, every note would be a word he couldn't speak, every phrase a declaration of love too precious and fragile for mere language. The black Steinway seemed to call to him from across the room, its keys gleaming like ivory teeth in the candlelight, waiting to give voice to the emotions that had been building in his chest for days, like pressure in a champagne bottle, ready to burst forth in a symphony of pure, undiluted love. Camden Rivers stood in the doorway, watching his best friend's nervous preparations with amused concern. "You know," Camden said gently, "you could just tell her how you feel, use actual words, revolutionary concept, I know." "I've tried words," Josh replied, loosening his tie only to retie it moments later. "At the opera, I tried to tell her that some love stories don't have to end in tragedy, and she completely missed the point. She thought I was speaking hypothetically about love in general, not about us. Maybe because there is no us yet," Camden pointed out with the brutal honesty that only a lifelong friend could deliver. "Maybe she doesn't see those hints because she doesn't believe someone like you could actually fall for someone like her." Josh paused in his pacing, Camden's words hitting him like a physical blow. "Someone like her. Nancy is extraordinary. She's intelligent, compassionate, beautiful." "I'm not arguing with you," Camden interrupted. "I'm telling you what she probably thinks. You're a billionaire, Josh. You date supermodels and socialites. Nancy works in a hotel and grew up in a working-class family. In her mind, you're probably just being kind to your employee, not falling head over heels in love." The thought that Nancy might see herself as somehow unworthy of his love made Josh's chest ache with frustration. How could she not see what he saw when he looked at her? How could she not understand that her authenticity, her genuine heart, her natural grace made every other woman he had ever known seem like a pale imitation of real beauty? "Then tonight has to be perfect," Josh said with quiet determination. "She has to understand that this isn't some charitable gesture or temporary arrangement. She has to see that she's become the most important person in my world." An hour later, Nancy made her way down to the piano bar, her pulse quickening with anticipation and curiosity about Josh's mysterious invitation to meet him there after dinner. She had changed into a dress that was simplicity itself, midnight, black silk that hugged her curves like liquid starlight and fell to just above her knees, paired with delicate pearl earrings that caught the light when she moved. Her hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders, and she had applied just a touch of rose-colored lipstick that made her full lips look like they were meant to be kissed. The Golden Hearts piano bar was legendary among those who moved in the city's most exclusive circles. an intimate sanctuary where celebrities and business moguls gathered to enjoy world-class cocktails and music in an atmosphere of sophisticated elegance that money couldn't buy and taste couldn't fake. Tonight, however, the familiar space had been transformed into something that belonged in the pages of the most romantic novels ever written. The lighting was softer than usual, creating pools of golden warmth that seemed to embrace every surface. They touched. Candles flickered on every table, their flames dancing in crystal holders that cast rainbow prisms across the dark wood and brass fixtures. The air was thick with the scent of roses and something else. Anticipation, perhaps, or the kind of magic that happened when two hearts were about to collide in the most beautiful way possible. Nancy paused in the doorway, her breath catching in her throat as she took in the romantic tableau before her. The piano bar was surprisingly empty for a Friday evening, with only a few couples scattered at the small round tables surrounding the piano, their quiet conversations creating a gentle murmur that seemed to enhance rather than disturb the intimate atmosphere. And there, sitting at the piano bench like he had been placed there by the gods of romance themselves, was Josh. He had loosened his tie and rolled up his sleeves, transforming his usual business attire into something more relaxed and approachable. His dark hair caught the candlelight as he moved, and Nancy could see the elegant line of his profile as his fingers moved across the keys in a gentle, warm-up melody that floated through the space like a whispered promise. There was something different about him tonight, a vulnerability in his posture, an emotional openness that she had never seen before, that made her heart race with possibilities she hardly dared to name. When he spotted her in the doorway, his face lit up with a smile that made her knees weak. "You came," he said softly, rising from the bench to greet her. "You sounded mysterious on the phone," Nancy replied, accepting the glass of champagne he offered her. "What's all this about?" "I wanted to play something for you," Josh said, his voice carrying a nervous edge that surprised her. "Something that means something to me. Will you sit?" Nancy settled into the chair closest to the piano, her dark eyes reflecting the candlelight as she watched Josh return to the bench. There was something different about him tonight, a vulnerability in his expression that made her pulse quicken with anticipation. Josh placed his hands on the keys with the reverence of a man about to bare his soul to the woman he loved, and began to play. The first notes of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major floated through the intimate space like a prayer made audible, each note perfect and pure, and filled with an emotion so profound that Nancy felt her breath catch in her throat. She had never heard him play before, had never known that beneath his business acumen and commanding presence lay the soul of an artist. His fingers moved across the keys with practiced grace, but it was the passion he brought to the music, the way he seemed to pour his very essence into each phrase, that made her heart stop beating for several magical seconds. The melody was achingly beautiful, full of longing and hope, and something that sounded suspiciously like love given voice through the language of music. Nancy found herself leaning forward, completely mesmerized by the sight of this powerful, confident man, revealing such tender vulnerability through his touch on the ivory keys. The way he glanced at her between phrases, his dark eyes speaking. Volumes that his voice had not yet been brave enough to articulate made her pulse quicken with a hope so intense it was almost painful. This wasn't just music. This was a conversation, a confession, a love letter written in notes and silences. And the space between heartbeats, every phrase seemed chosen specifically for her, every dynamic shift crafted to tell her something that words alone could never convey. The candlelight caught the gold in his dark hair as he played, and Nancy thought she had never seen anything more beautiful than this moment. This man, this perfect romantic scene that seemed too magical to be real. Josh was building toward the climactic passage, the moment where the melody soared highest and most passionately, when he planned to transition from Chopin's notes to words of his own. His heart hammered against his ribs as he prepared to speak the love that was threatening to burst from his chest like sunlight through storm clouds. Nancy was watching him with such rapt attention, such obvious emotion shining in her dark eyes, that he felt certain she could see straight into his soul. The music swelled around them, wrapping them in a cocoon of beauty and possibility, and Josh opened his mouth to speak the words that would change everything between them. "That's my song," bellowed a voice that could probably be heard 3 blocks away. "Hey, piano man, play my song!" Nancy and Josh turned in horror to see a massively drunk businessman in a rumpled suit, swaying precariously at the bar, his tie askew and his face flushed red with alcohol. The bartender was trying unsuccessfully to convince him to lower his voice, but the man was having none of it. "I love this song," the drunk guest continued, completely oblivious to the romantic scene he was destroying. "But you're playing it all wrong. Let me show you how it's done." Before anyone could stop him, the inebriated man lurched toward the piano, stumbling over chairs and knocking over a small table in his enthusiasm. Josh's fingers froze on the keys as the drunk businessman reached the piano and began singing at the top of his lungs, except he was singing the words to "My Way" to the tune of Chopin's Nocturne. "I did it my way," he warbled, off-key, his arms spread wide in a gesture that would have been dramatic if he weren't swaying dangerously close to falling over. "Yes, it was my way." The few other guests in the piano bar were trying to stifle their laughter, while the bartender frantically called for security. Josh sat frozen at the piano bench, watching his carefully planned romantic moment disintegrate into complete chaos. But then he heard something that made his heart soar despite the disaster unfolding around them. Nancy was laughing. Not the polite, restrained chuckle of someone trying to be diplomatic in an awkward situation, but genuine, joyful, uncontrollable laughter that lit up her entire face and made her eyes sparkle like stars. She was clutching her sides, tears of mirth streaming down her cheeks, as the drunk businessman continued his enthusiastic butchering of both Sinatra and Chopin simultaneously. "And now the end is near," the man continued, completely oblivious to the fact that security guards were approaching from both sides. "And so I face the final curtain." Nancy looked at Josh, saw his expression of complete mortification, and somehow that made everything even funnier. "I'm sorry," she gasped, between fits of laughter, "but this is the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen in my life." Josh stared at her, then began to smile. The smile became laughter that matched Nancy's. Pure joy. His perfect romantic moment had become the hotel's worst musical performance, but somehow that made it perfect. Security finally managed to escort the singing businessman out of the piano bar, still bellowing "My Way" as he disappeared into the lobby. But by then, Josh and Nancy were both laughing so hard they could barely breathe. "I'm so sorry," Josh said when he finally managed to catch his breath. "That was supposed to be, well, it was supposed to be romantic. It was perfect," Nancy said, wiping tears of laughter from her eyes. "Absolutely perfect." Josh looked at her in amazement. "Perfect? Nancy, that was a complete disaster." "No," Nancy said softly, her expression growing suddenly serious despite the smile still playing at her lips. "It was real, and real is always more beautiful than perfect." In that moment, sitting in the wreckage of his romantic plans, with Nancy's laughter still echoing in his ears, Josh realized something that took his breath away. He wasn't just falling in love with Nancy Esser. He was completely, irrevocably, desperately in love with her. And the best part was, she was falling in love with him too. Chapter 7. The Polo Match Truth. The Hamptons Polo Club stretched across manicured green fields like something from a dream, its pristine white pavilions and flowering gardens creating the perfect backdrop for New York's most exclusive sporting event. Nancy stood beside Josh on the emerald grass, watching elegantly dressed spectators arrive in luxury cars and designer outfits that cost more than most people's annual salaries. Her own ensemble, a flowing white sundress and wide-brimmed hat that Josh had insisted on buying for her, made her feel like she had stepped into a scene from The Great Gatsby. "I've never seen anything like this," Nancy murmured, watching as thoroughbred horses thundered across the field in pursuit of the small white ball, their riders wielding mallets with practiced precision. "It's like watching poetry in motion." Josh smiled, his heart swelling with familiar warmth at her genuine wonder. After 5 days together, he had become addicted to seeing the world through Nancy's eyes, the way she found beauty and meaning in experiences that the wealthy crowd around them took for granted. While other guests sipped champagne and gossiped about stock portfolios and society scandals, Nancy was completely absorbed in the skill and athleticism of the sport itself. "The horses are incredible," she continued, shading her eyes with her. "And to better watch the action, look at the way that chestnut mare anticipates her rider's needs. It's like they're reading each other's minds." "You know about horses?" Josh asked, surprised and charmed by this new facet of her personality. Nancy's smile was soft with memory. "My grandmother had a small farm outside the city when I was little. Just 2 horses, an old gelding named Thunder and a paint mare called Star. I spent every summer mucking stalls and learning to ride bareback. Grandma always said that horses could see into people's souls, that they knew who was genuine and who was just pretending." The image of young Nancy racing across fields on horseback, her hair flying behind her and her face radiant with joy, made Josh's chest ache with tenderness. How many layers did this extraordinary woman have? How many more wonderful surprises was he going to discover about her? "Josh, darling." Evangeline Hartwell's voice cut through their intimate moment like a blade through silk. She approached them across the grass with predatory grace, her designer outfit and diamond jewelry catching the afternoon sunlight. "How wonderful to see. You hear? I was just telling the Vanderbilts about your charitable work with local hotels." Nancy felt the familiar sting of Evangeline's barely concealed insults, but she was getting better at recognizing the woman's calculated cruelty. Instead of rising to the bait, Nancy simply smiled politely and turned her attention back to the polo match. "Nancy, dear," Evangeline continued with false sweetness, "I hope you're enjoying your little adventure in our world. It must be so fascinating for someone of your background to see how the other half lives." "It is fascinating," Nancy agreed calmly, her voice carrying no defensiveness or shame. "I'm learning so much about different perspectives on wealth and privilege." Evangeline's eyes narrowed, sensing that her usual tactics weren't having the desired effect. "Oh, and what conclusions are you drawing?" Nancy turned to face her fully, her dark eyes clear and direct. "I'm learning that real class has nothing to do with bank accounts or family names. Some of the most elegant, gracious people I've ever met have been working in hotel housekeeping and restaurant kitchens. And some of the rudest, most small-minded people I've encountered have been wearing designer gowns and inherited jewelry." The insult was delivered with such quiet dignity that it took Evangeline a moment to realize she had been thoroughly and publicly dismissed. When the meaning sank in, her face flushed with humiliation and rage. Josh bit back a smile, pride surging through him as he watched Nancy handle Evangeline's attack with grace and intelligence. This was why he loved her, not just her beauty or her warmth, but her unshakable integrity and her refusal to be diminished by people who mistook cruelty for sophistication. "Well," Evangeline said tightly, "I suppose different people have different standards." "Yes," Nancy replied serenely, "they certainly do." As Evangeline stalked away in defeat, Josh felt something shift inside his chest. Standing here in the sunshine, watching Nancy's quiet triumph over one of New York's most vicious social climbers, he realized that his feelings for her had moved far beyond attraction or even love. Nancy Esser had become essential to his happiness, as necessary to his life as breathing. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of champagne toasts and polite conversation, but Josh found himself watching Nancy more than the polo match. She charmed everyone she met, with her genuine interest in their stories, her thoughtful questions, and her complete lack of pretension. When Senator Morrison's elderly mother struggled with her walking cane, Nancy immediately offered her arm for support. When a child at a nearby table began crying over spilled ice cream, Nancy quietly appeared with napkins and gentle words that turned tears into giggles. Every interaction reinforced what Josh already knew. Nancy possessed something rare and precious that no amount of money could buy. She had authentic goodness, the kind of character that made everyone around her feel valued and important. As the sun began to set over the polo fields, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Josh knew he couldn't wait any longer. Their arrangement was supposed to end in 2 days, and the thought of Nancy walking out of his life forever was unbearable. He had to tell her how he felt, had to find the courage to ask her to stay. "Walk with me?" he asked softly, offering Nancy his arm as the crowd began to disperse. They strolled away from the pavilions toward a quiet grove of oak trees at the edge of the property, the sounds of conversation and laughter fading behind them. Nancy's hand rested lightly on Josh's arm, and he could feel the warmth of her touch through his shirt sleeve. "Thank you for today," Nancy said, as they paused beneath the spreading branches of an ancient oak. "I know dealing with people like Evangeline isn't pleasant, but watching you navigate these social situations has taught me so much about grace under pressure." Josh turned to face her, his heart hammering against his ribs with nervous energy. The golden light filtering through the leaves made her skin glow like honey, and he thought he had never seen anything more beautiful in his entire life. "Nancy," he began, his voice rougher than he intended, "I need to ask you something." She looked up at him with those luminous dark eyes, and Josh felt his carefully planned words scatter like leaves in the wind. How could he explain that she had changed? Everything for him? How could he tell her that the thought of going back to his empty penthouse, his hollow social obligations, his meaningless relationships felt like a living death? "Our arrangement," he started again, then stopped, running his hand through his hair in frustration. "What I mean is, when this week ends..." Nancy waited patiently, her head tilted in that way she had when she was giving someone her complete attention. "I was wondering if you might consider extending our agreement," Josh said carefully, trying to find words that wouldn't scare her away. "The business benefits have been significant, and I think we work well together. Perhaps we could discuss a longer-term arrangement?" Nancy's expression shifted, and Josh saw something flicker across her face that looked like disappointment. "A longer-term arrangement," she repeated slowly. "Yes," Josh said, encouraged by what he mistook for interest. "More events, more opportunities. For you to experience this world, the compensation would be significantly increased, of course." Nancy was quiet for a long moment, staring out across the polo fields where horses grazed peacefully in the fading light. When she finally spoke, her voice was carefully neutral. "That's very generous, Josh. Can I think about it?" "Of course," Josh said, though something in her tone made his chest tighten with unease. "Take all the time you need." As they walked back toward the car in companionable silence, Josh told himself that Nancy's hesitation was natural. She was being practical, considering her options. But deep in his heart, he knew something had gone wrong. He just wasn't sure what. What he didn't know was that Nancy's heart was breaking. She had thought hoped that Josh was about to say something personal, something real about their connection over the past week. Instead, he had offered her more money, a longer contract, an extended business arrangement. The message was clear. To Josh Lepper, she would always be an employee, never an equal. She would always be someone he paid to be in his life, never someone he chose to love. Chapter 8. The Penthouse Confession. The elevator whispered upward through the Golden Heart Hotel toward Josh's penthouse suite, carrying Nancy into what felt like another world entirely. She had been in luxury hotels before, working in them, cleaning them, serving guests who belonged in them, but she had never experienced this level of opulence as anything other than an observer. Tonight, wrapped in a silk evening gown that cost more than her mother's monthly mortgage payment, she was crossing a threshold she had never imagined she would be allowed to enter. Josh stood beside her in the mirrored elevator, devastatingly handsome in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, but Nancy could sense a tension radiating from him that she didn't understand. Ever since the polo match 3 days ago, something had shifted between them. Their conversations remained warm and easy. Their public appearances continued to be flawless, but there was an undercurrent of unspoken emotion that made her pulse quicken and her heart ache with unnamed longing. The penthouse doors opened to reveal a space that took Nancy's breath away. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Manhattan's glittering skyline, while the interior was decorated with understated elegance that spoke of refined taste rather than ostentatious display. Original artwork adorned cream-colored walls. Fresh flowers perfumed the air, and soft lighting created an atmosphere of intimate luxury. "This is incredible," Nancy said softly, moving toward the windows to gaze out at the city lights stretching endlessly in every direction. "It's like being on top of the world." Josh watched her silhouette against the backdrop of his city and felt his chest tighten with familiar emotion. Over the past week, Nancy had transformed his sterile penthouse simply by being in it. The space that had always felt like an elegant prison now seemed warm and alive when she was there, her laughter echoing off the walls and her presence filling every corner with light. "Would you like some wine?" Josh asked, moving toward the bar with nervous energy. "I have a bottle of Chateau d'Yquem that's supposed to be exceptional." "That sounds lovely," Nancy replied, though she was more interested in watching Josh than in sampling expensive wine. There was something different about him tonight, a vulnerability in his movements, a hesitation in his voice that was completely unlike his usual confident demeanor. Josh poured 2 glasses of the golden wine, his hands not quite steady as he carried them to where Nancy stood by the windows. As he handed her the crystal glass, their fingers brushed, and Nancy felt that familiar spark of electricity that had been growing stronger between them with each passing day. "To the most extraordinary week of my life," Josh said softly, raising his glass in a toast. Nancy's heart skipped several beats at the sincerity in his voice. "To new experiences," she replied, though her words felt inadequate to express everything she was feeling. They sipped the wine in companionable silence, the city sparkling below them like a carpet of stars. Nancy had never tasted anything so exquisite. The wine was like liquid honey touched with starlight, but she was more intoxicated by Josh's proximity than by any alcohol. "Nancy," Josh said quietly, setting down his wine glass and turning to face her fully, "can I ask you something personal?" "Of course," Nancy replied, though something in his tone made her pulse quicken with anticipation. "What do you dream about?" Josh asked, his dark eyes searching her face with intense focus. "I don't mean career goals or practical aspirations. I mean, what do you dream about when you're lying in bed at night, when you're completely honest with yourself about what would make you truly happy?" Nancy was quiet for a long moment, surprised by the depth and intimacy of his question. No one had ever asked her that before. Not her family, not her friends. certainly not any of the men she had dated. The fact that Josh wanted to know her deepest dreams, her most private hopes, made her feel seen in a way she had never experienced. "That's a dangerous question," she said with a small smile, though her voice carried a note of vulnerability that made Josh's heart ache. "Why dangerous? Because if I tell you the truth, you'll think I'm naive or foolish or living in a fantasy world that doesn't exist." Josh moved closer to her, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his dark eyes, close enough to catch the subtle scent of his cologne mixed with something uniquely him. "Try me," he said softly. Nancy took a shaky breath, her courage gathering like storm clouds before a downpour. "I dream about being loved," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not for what I can do or what I can provide or how I look in a designer dress, just loved for who I am when nobody's watching, when I'm not performing or trying to be impressive. I dream about mattering to someone the way they matter to me." She paused, her dark eyes reflecting the city lights like mirrors. "I dream about coming home to someone who's happy to see me, just because I'm me. Someone who knows that I eat ice, a cream for breakfast when I'm sad, that I cry during commercials with puppies, that I still sleep with the teddy bear I've had since I was 7. Someone who thinks those things are endearing instead of embarrassing." Josh felt his breath catch in his throat. Everything she was describing, the intimate knowledge, the unconditional acceptance, the pure joy of simply being together, was exactly what he wanted to give her, what he had been dreaming about giving her since the moment they met. "I dream about Sunday mornings where we don't leave bed except to make coffee," Nancy continued, her voice growing stronger as she allowed herself to voice her deepest longings. "About fighting over what to watch on television and then falling asleep, tangled together on the couch. About someone who holds my hand during scary movies and doesn't laugh when I jump at the predictable parts." She turned back to the window, her reflection ghost-like in the glass. "Silly dreams, right? In a world where people have private jets and vacation homes and unlimited resources, I'm dreaming about holding hands during movies. Not silly," Josh said, his voice rough with emotion. "Beautiful. The most beautiful dreams I've ever heard." Nancy looked at him in surprise, struck by the intensity in his voice, the way he was looking at her, like she was the most precious thing he had ever seen. "Nancy," Josh said, moving even closer to her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "What if I told you that you already matter to someone that way? What if I told you that someone thinks about you first thing in the morning and last thing at night? What if someone already knows about your ice cream breakfasts and your teddy bear and thinks those things are perfect?" Nancy's heart beat faster with anticipation. There was something in his eyes, something in the way he was looking at her, that made her wonder if he might be talking about himself. But that was impossible, wasn't it? Men like Josh Lepper didn't fall in love with women like her. "Josh," she whispered, her voice trembling with hope and fear in equal measure. "What if someone has been falling in love with you since the moment you defended him from a rude receptionist?" Josh continued, his hand reaching up to cup her cheek with infinite tenderness. "What if someone thinks you're the most extraordinary woman he's ever met, and the thought of letting you walk out of his life is..." The sharp ring of the telephone shattered the intimate moment like glass hitting concrete. Josh froze, his hand still cradling Nancy's face, his eyes closing in frustration. As the phone continued its insistent summons, "Don't answer it," Nancy whispered, her heart in her throat as she realized what Josh had been about to say. The phone rang again, and Josh's jaw clenched with obvious internal struggle. "I have to," he said reluctantly. "My lawyer said he might. Call tonight about the Morrison deal. If I don't answer..." Nancy stepped back, the spell broken, reality crashing back around them like cold water. "Of course," she said, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Business first." Josh hesitated for a moment, clearly torn between his professional obligations and his desire to finish what he had started. But years of conditioning won out, and he moved toward the phone with obvious reluctance. "Jasper," Josh answered, his voice tight with barely suppressed frustration. "This better be important." Nancy turned back to the window, her reflection showing a woman whose heart was breaking. For a moment, one beautiful, perfect moment, she had thought Josh was about to tell her he loved her. She had thought their connection was real, that the past week had meant as much to him as it had to her. But the ringing phone was a stark reminder of their different worlds. Josh would always choose business over personal feelings, deals over declarations of love. She would always be secondary to his real priorities. As Josh's voice droned on behind her, discussing contracts and negotiations and profit margins, Nancy realized something that both broke her heart and set her free. She deserved better than being someone's second choice. Chapter 9. The Fairy Tale Demand. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Josh's penthouse office, casting golden rectangles across the Persian rug where Nancy stood, with her hands clasped behind her back, trying to maintain her composure. 7 days. Their arrangement was officially over, and she felt like she was standing on the edge of a cliff, about to lose everything that had come to matter to her. Josh sat behind his massive mahogany desk, looking devastatingly handsome in his perfectly tailored charcoal suit. But Nancy could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his fingers drummed against the leather desktop with nervous energy. The check for $50,000 lay between them like a white flag of surrender, but neither of them had reached for it. "So," Nancy said quietly, her voice carefully controlled despite the storm of emotions raging in her chest. "I guess this is it." Josh looked up at her with those dark eyes that had haunted her dreams for a week, and Nancy saw something there that made her heart skip several beats. Pain, longing, and something else that looked almost like love. "Nancy," Josh said, his voice rougher than usual, "before you go, I have something I'd like to discuss with you." Nancy's pulse quickened with hope. Maybe the interruption last night hadn't ruined everything. Maybe he was finally going to say the words she had been desperate to hear. Josh stood and moved around the desk, closing the distance between them, until Nancy could smell his cologne, could feel the warmth radiating from his body. He was close enough to touch, close enough to kiss, and Nancy had to fight the overwhelming urge to throw herself into his arms and beg him not to let her go. "This week has been..." Josh paused, running his hand through his dark hair in a gesture Nancy had come to recognize as his nervous tell. "Extraordinary. You've been extraordinary, and I find myself reluctant to let this end." Nancy's heart began to hammer against her ribs. This was it. This was the moment where Josh would tell her he loved her, where he would ask her to stay, not as his employee, but as his partner, his equal, his chosen companion. "I have a proposition for you," Josh continued, his eyes never leaving her face. "A permanent arrangement that would be beneficial to both of us." "What kind of arrangement?" Nancy asked, though something in his tone made her stomach tighten with growing dread. Josh moved to the wall of windows, his hands clasped behind his back as he gazed out at the city skyline. "I'd like to set you up in your own apartment. Something elegant, somewhere you'd be comfortable. Upper East Side, perhaps, or Tribeca if you prefer something more artistic." Nancy felt the blood drain from her face, but she forced herself to remain silent, to let him finish whatever he was trying to say. "You'd have a generous monthly allowance, of course, enough to live well, to buy whatever you need or want. A credit card with no limit, access to the best restaurants, theater tickets, shopping at any boutique in the city." Josh's voice was growing more confident now, as if he had convinced himself this was a good idea. "You'd accompany me to business, Events, social functions, anywhere I need an elegant, intelligent companion. A companion, Nancy repeated slowly, the word tasting like ashes in her mouth. The finest of everything, Nancy. Clothes, jewelry, travel. We could spend weekends in the Hamptons, take trips to Paris or Rome whenever you wanted. You'd never have to worry about money again, never have to work another service job or struggle to pay bills. Josh turned back to face her, his expression earnest and hopeful. Think about it. You could quit your job at the hotel, focus on your education if you wanted, or pursue any interests you've never had time for. Art classes, languages, anything that appealed to you. All I'd ask in return is your company, your conversation, your presence in my life. Nancy stared at him in growing horror as the full implications of his offer became clear. He was offering to make her his kept woman, his beautiful, well-dressed, conveniently available mistress. Everything he was describing, the apartment, the allowance, the shopping, the trips, it all came with an unspoken price tag. "Josh," she said quietly, "what exactly are you asking me to be?" Josh's confidence faltered slightly at the tone in her voice. "I'm asking you to be mine. To let me take care of you, to give you the life you deserve, the life I deserve," Nancy repeated, her voice growing stronger with each word. "And what life is that exactly? Sitting in an expensive apartment waiting for you to have time for me, being available whenever you need arm candy for a business function, pretending to be satisfied with whatever scraps of attention you can spare between board meetings and golf games." "That's not what I meant," Josh said quickly, though something in his expression suggested that was exactly what he had meant. I care about you, Nancy, more than I've ever cared about anyone. I want to make you happy." "By making me your mistress?" Nancy's voice was steady now, though tears were beginning to gather in her dark eyes. "By giving me everything except the one thing that actually matters?" Josh looked confused and frustrated. "What more could you want? I'm offering you financial security for life, luxury beyond anything you've ever imagined." "Love!" Nancy exploded, her composure cracking. "I want love, Josh. I want someone who chooses me not because I'm convenient or beautiful or good for their image, but because they can't imagine life without me. I want marriage, not some elegant apartment where you hide me like a secret." Josh took a step back, clearly stunned by her outburst. "Nancy, you're being unrealistic. Marriage, that's complicated. There are business considerations, social expectations." "Stop," Nancy said, holding up her hand. "Just stop talking." The silence that fell between them was deafening. Nancy could hear the distant sounds of traffic from the street below, the muffled voices of hotel staff going about their daily routines, the thundering of her own heartbeat as her world collapsed around her. "Let me make sure I understand," Nancy said, her voice deadly calm. "You're offering me money, clothes, jewelry, and travel in exchange for my body and my availability whenever you desire my company. Is that correct?" "You're making it sound... Is that correct?" Nancy interrupted, her dark eyes blazing with hurt and fury. Josh's jaw clenched, and for a moment Nancy thought he might deny it, might find some way to make his offer sound like something other than what it was. Instead, he nodded. Once a sharp jerk of his head. "I see," Nancy said quietly. "And you think this is what I deserve because I'm poor? Because I work for a living? Because I don't have a trust fund or a family name that opens doors?" "That's not... What you're describing isn't love, Josh. It's not even affection, it's ownership. You want to buy me like you'd buy a car or a piece of art, something beautiful to display when it suits you and put away when it doesn't." Tears were streaming down Nancy's cheeks now, but her voice remained steady and strong. "I thought you were different. I thought you saw me as an equal, as someone worthy of real love and respect, but you see me the same way everyone else does. As something to be used and discarded when you're done with me." Josh reached toward her, his own eyes bright with unshed tears. "Nancy, please," You don't understand. I understand perfectly, Nancy said, stepping away from his outstretched hand. You want all the benefits of having me in your life without any of the commitment, any of the vulnerability, any of the real emotional risk that comes with actual love. She moved toward the door, her head held high despite the tears that continued to fall. I'm worth more than that, Josh. I deserve better than being someone's convenient arrangement. I deserve someone who loves me enough to choose me publicly, proudly, completely. Nancy paused with her hand on the door handle, turning back to look at Josh one last time. He stood frozen in the center of his opulent office, his face a mask of shock and pain. And for a moment, Nancy's resolve wavered. He looked broken, lost, like a man who had just realized he had thrown away the most precious thing in his life. But then she remembered his words, his casual assumption that money could buy her love and loyalty, and her spine straightened with renewed determination. I want the fairy tale, Josh, she said softly. The real one, with love and commitment, and a man who's brave enough to choose me over his business considerations and social expectations. Until someone can offer me that, I'd rather be alone. And with that, Nancy Esser walked out of Josh Lepper's life, leaving behind $50,000 and the most powerful man she would ever love. Chapter 10, The White Knight Rescue. 3 weeks. 21 days since Nancy had walked out of his life, and Josh felt like he was slowly dying from the inside out. The Golden Heart Hotel continued to operate with its usual efficiency. The Morrison deal had closed successfully, and his bank account had grown by several $1 million, but none of it mattered. Nothing mattered without Nancy's laughter echoing through his penthouse, without her gentle presence transforming his sterile world into something warm and alive. Josh stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office, staring down at the busy street below without really seeing anything. Camden Rivers watched his best friend with growing concern, noting the hollow look in Josh's eyes, the way he barely touched his food, the countless nights he spent playing melancholy songs on his piano until dawn. You have to go to her, Camden said quietly from the doorway. Josh didn't turn around. She made her choice very clear. She wants the fairy tale, and I'm apparently not capable of providing that. Because you offered her everything except the one thing she actually wanted, Camden replied, with the brutal honesty that only a lifelong friend could deliver. You offered her money and luxury and the chance to be your mistress. What you didn't offer her was your heart. I tried to tell her how I felt, Josh said defensively. That night in the penthouse, I was about to what? Tell her you love her, ask her to marry you. Because from what I witnessed, you offered her a business, arrangement with sexual benefits. Not exactly the same thing. Josh finally turned around, and Camden was shocked by how gaunt his friend looked. Josh looked gaunt, having lost weight he couldn't spare. His suits hung loose, and dark circles under his eyes showed sleepless nights and endless regret. What if she won't see me? Josh asked quietly. What if I go to her and she tells me it's too late? Then at least you'll know you tried, Camden said gently. But Josh, if you don't try, if you let pride and fear keep you from fighting for the best thing that's ever happened to you, you'll regret it for the rest of your life. Across town, Nancy sat in the tiny studio apartment she shared with Sage. Dakota, staring at the rejection letter in her hands without really reading the words. She had applied for dozens of jobs since leaving the Golden Heart, but somehow word had gotten out about her abrupt departure from the hotel industry's most prestigious establishment. No one would hire her. No one would even interview her. And her savings were dwindling rapidly, but the financial stress was nothing compared to the ache in her heart. Every morning, she woke up hoping the pain would have faded, that she would have stopped missing Josh with an intensity that took her breath away. Instead, each day seemed worse than the last. Honey, Sage said gently, settling beside Nancy on The second-hand couch. You need to eat something. You're wasting away. Nancy shook her head, unable to summon any appetite. I'm fine. No, you're not. You're miserable. You love him, Nancy. Anyone with eyes can see that. And from what I hear through the hotel grapevine, he's just as miserable as you are. It doesn't matter, Nancy said quietly. Love isn't enough if he can't see me as an equal. If he can't offer me real partnership, real commitment, then we have no future together. A sharp knock on the apartment door interrupted their conversation. Nancy frowned, not expecting any visitors, especially not at 8 o'clock on a Tuesday evening. I'll get it, Sage said, moving toward the door. She peered through the peephole and gasped. Nancy, you need to see this. Nancy joined her at the small window that looked down onto the fire escape, and her heart stopped beating entirely. Josh stood on the narrow metal platform outside their fourth-floor window, wearing jeans and a simple white shirt instead of his usual expensive suits. His dark hair was disheveled from the wind, and he was carrying a bouquet of white roses. Camden Rivers stood on the sidewalk below, grinning up at them with obvious amusement. What is he doing? Nancy whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs. Josh looked up and saw her face in the window. Even from several feet away, Nancy could see the mixture of love and desperation in his dark eyes, the way his hands trembled slightly as he held the flowers. "Princess Nancy!" Josh called out, his voice carrying clearly through the glass. "I need to talk to you." Nancy's hands flew to her mouth, tears already beginning to stream down her cheeks. He had climbed the fire escape. Josh Lepper, who was afraid of heights, who owned elevators and private jets and every convenience money could buy, had climbed 4 flights of a rickety fire escape to reach her window. With shaking hands, Nancy unlatched the window and pushed it open. The cool evening air rushed into the small apartment, carrying with it the scent of roses and the sound of traffic from the street below. "You're afraid of heights," Nancy said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Terrified," Josh agreed, his knuckles white as he gripped the metal railing. "But I'm more afraid of losing you forever." "Josh, what are you doing here?" Josh took a deep breath, his eyes never leaving her face. "I came to rescue you," he said softly. "Rescue me from what?" "From the biggest mistake of my life," Josh replied, his voice breaking with emotion. "From my own stupidity and fear and complete inability to see what was right in front of me." He held out the roses with hands that shook visibly. "Nancy, I don't want you to be my mistress or my companion or my convenient arrangement. I want you to be my wife, my partner, my equal in every way that matters." Nancy felt her knees go weak. "Josh, I love you," Josh continued, the words pouring out of him like water from a broken dam. "I love your strength and your courage and the way you laugh at terrible movies. I love that you eat ice cream for breakfast and cry during puppy commercials. I love the way you make everyone around you feel important and valued. I love that you saw through all my money and power and fell in love with just me." Tears were streaming down Nancy's face now, but she managed a watery smile. "What happens after the knight rescues the princess?" Josh's face lit up with hope and joy. "She rescues him right back," he said softly, "every single day for the rest of their lives." With movements that seemed to happen in slow motion, Josh lowered himself to one knee on the narrow fire escape platform. From his pocket, he pulled out a small velvet box and opened it to reveal a simple, elegant diamond ring. "This was my grandmother's," Josh said, his voice thick with emotion. "She wore it for 60 years, and she always said it would bring its next owner a lifetime of true love. Nancy Esser, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving that I'm worthy of your love?" Nancy didn't hesitate. "Yes," she breathed, reaching through the window to cup his face in her hands. "Yes, yes, yes." Josh slipped the ring onto her finger with trembling hands, then pulled her forward for a kiss that was everything their fairy tale had been building toward. It was passionate and tender and full of promise, the kind of kiss that marked the beginning of forever. The sound of applause from the street below broke them apart, and Nancy looked down to see that a small crowd had gathered to watch the romantic drama unfolding on the fire escape. Camden was cheering loudly, and even some of the neighbors had come out of their buildings to witness the spectacle. "Come inside," Nancy laughed, pulling Josh through the window into her tiny apartment. "Before you fall and ruin our perfect ending." 6 months later, the Golden Heart Hotel hosted the wedding of the century. Nancy walked down the petal-strewn aisle in a gown that made her look like a princess from a fairy tale, her face radiant with joy as she approached Josh, who waited for her at the altar with tears of happiness in his eyes. As they exchanged vows in front of 300 guests, Nancy caught sight of Sage Dakota in the front row, beaming with pride. She saw Camden Rivers wiping his eyes with a handkerchief, and even the formerly snobbish Octavia Sterling looking on with genuine warmth. But what made Nancy's heart overflow with happiness was the sight of her mother and grandmother in the place of honor, wearing beautiful gowns and being treated like the royalty they had always been in Nancy's eyes. As Josh slipped a platinum wedding band onto her finger and promised to love her for all the days of his life, Nancy realized that she had gotten exactly what she had asked for that terrible day in his office. She had gotten her fairy tale.